When my mother died, my brother inherited her downtown condo. I got an old barn on 40 acres of dead land in rural Tennessee. My husband didn't even wait until we got home to laugh. That was the night everything started to fall apart. And the night it started to come back together. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I was doing everything right. I had a husband I loved, a daughter I adored, a home I kept, and a life I believed in. I worked part-time as a dental hygienist 3 days a week. The other 4 days, I managed everything else. The school runs, the grocery lists, the birthday cards sent on time, the doctor's appointments, the permission slips, the dinner on the table at 6:30 every night without fail. My husband never said thank you. But he never said much of anything kind, really. I told myself that was just how he was. Some people show love differently. Some people are just busy. Some people need time. I gave him 9 years of time. The day of my mother's will reading, I wore a black dress I'd owned since college. My brother arrived in a pressed suit with his wife on his arm. My husband wore his good watch, the one he only took out when he wanted to impress someone. I remember thinking that was strange. Who was he trying to impress at a will reading? The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and wood polish. My aunt sat in the corner, quiet, holding a tissue she never used. My mother's financial advisor was there too, a short man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. The lawyer read slowly, methodically. The downtown Nashville condo, fully paid, valued at approximately $410,000, goes to my son, David. My brother exhaled. His wife smiled and squeezed his hand. My husband shifted in his chair next to me. I felt his attention sharpen, like an animal that just heard something. The lawyer continued. The rural property in Harlan County, Tennessee, 43 acres including the original farmhouse and barn structure, goes to my daughter, Claire. The room didn't go silent. That would have been better, actually. Instead, my aunt made a small sound, like a soft exhale of pity. My brother looked at the floor. His wife looked at me with that expression people use when they feel sorry for you but also relieved it isn't them. My husband said nothing until we were in the parking lot. Then he said, "A barn." "She left you a barn," I said. "She left me land too." He unlocked the car without looking at me. 40 acres of Tennessee dirt, Claire. What are you going to do with that? Grow corn? I didn't answer. I got in the passenger seat. He started the engine. Your brother got a condo in downtown Nashville, he said. You got a structure that probably doesn't even have running water. It has a farmhouse, I said. He laughed. That single sound. I can still hear it. Short, dismissive, the kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh at all. It's a verdict. That night, after our daughter was asleep, he sat at the kitchen counter scrolling through his phone and said, without looking up, "You know this is exactly why I never understood your family." I asked him what he meant. He looked up then. Your mother spent her whole life working, and the best she could do for you was a broken barn in the middle of nowhere. That's what she thought of you. I stood very still. That's what she thought you were worth, he said. I walked upstairs. I sat on the edge of our bed in the dark for a long time. I told myself he was grieving in his own way, that he didn't mean it, that people say things. But I had heard him clearly. And something in me, some quiet part that had been patient for a very long time, went completely still. The next morning, I called my cousin Rachel, who is a family attorney in Memphis. I didn't tell my husband. I drove to her office on my lunch break, and I sat across from her, and I told her everything. Not just about the barn, about the 9 years, about the way he spoke to me, about the way I had made myself smaller and smaller trying to fit into a shape he would approve of. She listened. Then she said, the first thing you need to understand is that inheritance is separate property. In Tennessee, what your mother left you is yours alone. It does not become marital property simply because you are married. He has no legal claim to it. I let that sit. Then she said, "Do you want to talk about your options?" I said yes. We talked for 2 hours. I did not tell my husband about that conversation. I did not tell my brother or my aunt or anyone. I drove home, picked my daughter up from school, made dinner, and smiled at the right times. Inside, something had shifted. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do. but I knew I needed to understand what I had before I did anything at all. 3 weeks after the will reading, I drove out to Harlan County alone. I told my husband I was going to assess the property. He said, "Let me know if it's worth the gas money." It took just under 3 hours to get there. The last 20 minutes were on a 2-lane road that cut through low hills and open fields. The land appeared before the structures did, long and rolling, brown in the late autumn, with a tree line at the far edge that caught the low afternoon light. It was quiet in a way that felt like something. The farmhouse was small and worn, but solid. The porch boards were soft in 2 spots, but the foundation was good. Inside smelled like cedar and dust and something faintly floral, like dried lavender. There were still dishes in the cabinet. A quilt folded on the arm of a chair. My mother had not been out here in at least 2 years because of her health, but the house held her somehow. I walked through every room slowly. Then I walked out to the barn. It was larger than I expected. 2 stories. Old red paint faded to something closer to rust. The kind of structure that people photograph for calendars. The main doors were padlocked. I found the key on a hook inside the farmhouse, 3rd drawer in the kitchen, under a stack of old seed catalogs. Inside the barn, the light came through the slats in long diagonal lines. There was old equipment along one wall, shelves of mason jars, a workbench with tools still laid out like someone had just stepped away for lunch. I walked the full length of it slowly. At the far end, behind a partial wall that divided the storage section from what might have been a workshop, I found something that didn't fit. A metal filing cabinet, the kind you see in offices, gray and clean and completely out of place among the wood and rust and dust of everything else. It had no lock. I pulled the top drawer open. Inside were files. Organized, labeled, recent. The tabs were written in my mother's handwriting. I pulled out the first folder. Inside were letters, city correspondence, county planning documents. The letterhead said Harlan County Development Authority. I sat down on an overturned crate and started reading. The language was formal and dry, but I understood enough. Proposed mixed-use development corridor. Rural to commercial rezoning application. Infrastructure, expansion timeline. There was a survey map folded inside the second folder. I opened it on the workbench, smoothing the creases. The property was outlined in red. A thick blue line ran along the eastern boundary. The blue line was a proposed road extension, a new connector route between 2 growing towns, designed to redirect traffic away from an overloaded state highway. The eastern edge of my mother's 43 acres sat directly in the path of the anticipated commercial development that would follow. My hands weren't steady when I opened the 3rd folder. Inside was a letter from a company called Summit Ridge Development Group. It was addressed to my mother, dated 14 months ago. Dear Mrs. Holloway, we are writing to express continued interest in acquiring the Harlan County property. Our original offer of $1.2 million remains on the table. We understand this land has personal significance to your family and we respect your timeline. Please do not hesitate to reach out when you are ready to discuss. $1.2 million. I read it again. My mother had received this offer more than a year ago. She had said nothing. Not to me, not to my brother, not to anyone, as far as I knew. And she had not accepted it. There was a 4th folder, thinner than the others. Inside was a single envelope with my name written on the front in her handwriting. Just Claire. No address. No stamp. Like she'd been waiting to hand it to me herself. I sat down again before I opened it. My hands were shaking. Not because I was afraid of what it said. I was afraid of how much I had needed to hear her voice one more time, without knowing it until that exact moment. I opened the envelope. The letter was 2 pages. Written in the careful cursive she had used my whole life. Claire, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I left you. I want you to understand why. I stopped reading for a moment. The barn was very quiet. Outside, wind moved through the tree line at the far end of the property. I continued. I know people will look at what David received and what you received, and they will assume I valued him more. I need you to know that is not true. I gave David the condo because David needs things handed to him clearly. He has always needed the straightforward path. You have never needed that. You have always been the one who looked deeper, who waited, who understood that the surface of something is almost never the whole story. I pressed my hand against my mouth. This land is not a consolation prize. It is the most valuable thing I own. The Development Authority has been in contact for over 2 years. I declined every offer because I was not ready to sell and because I wanted to make sure it went to the right hands. Your hands. You will know what to do with it. You always have. There is more information in the files. The rezoning was approved 6 months ago. I did not want to tell you while I was still alive because I did not trust the people around you to let you make this decision for yourself. That sentence landed like something dropped from a great height. She knew. She had watched for 9 years the same way I had lived for 9 years, and she had seen what I had been too close to see clearly. She continued, "Please speak to a lawyer before you speak to anyone else. The property is yours entirely. It cannot be divided in a divorce. But please make sure you protect yourself first. Do things in the right order, my love. That has always been your gift. Don't let anyone rush you out of it. I love you more than I ever knew how to say out loud. I am sorry I wasn't better at saying it. Mom." I sat in that barn for a long time. The light through the slats moved and changed, and eventually I realized the afternoon was going. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. I took every file out of the cabinet and stacked them in order and placed them in the canvas tote bag I had brought. I locked the barn, locked the farmhouse, and walked back to my car. On the drive home, I did not play music. I just drove. That week, I went back to Rachel. I brought the files. I sat across from her, and I placed everything on her desk, and I said, "I want to do this in the right order." She read through the documents carefully. Then she looked up at me and said, "Claire, this land is going to be worth significantly more than the original offer by the time construction begins." "I know," I said. She said, "And you want to file before any of this becomes public?" "Yes," I said. She said, "Good. That is absolutely the right call." We filed for divorce the following Monday. I did not tell my husband why. I told him calmly, in the kitchen, the same kitchen where he had laughed in the parking lot still echoing in the back of my mind, that I wanted to end the marriage. He was surprised in the way people are surprised by things they should have seen coming. He asked if there was someone else. I said no. He said he wanted to work on it. I said I had been working on it for 9 years. He moved into his brother's place 2 weeks later. I told no one about the land. Not my brother, not my aunt. Not the friends who checked in with casseroles and concerned texts. I thanked them and said I was doing okay, and I focused on my daughter and I waited. Rachel handled the paperwork. Because the property was inherited, it was entirely outside the marital estate. He had no claim to it. The divorce was not simple, but that part was clear. 4 months after I filed, I called the number on the Summit Ridge letterhead. A woman answered and transferred me to a man named Marcus. I told him I was the new owner of the Harlan County property and that I was ready to talk. There was a short pause. Then he said, "We are very glad to hear from you." We scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday. I drove out to Nashville for it. The office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown. 3 people were in the room when I arrived. Marcus, a woman named Donna who handled acquisitions, and a younger man who took notes. They were polite, professional, and very clearly interested. Marcus laid out the situation clearly. The rezoning had been finalized. The Connector Road project was confirmed with a construction start date of the following spring. The commercial development that was projected to follow would transform that corridor into a high-traffic commercial zone within 3 years. They wanted to break ground on a mixed retail and hospitality development anchored at the eastern end of my property. He slid a folder across the table. I opened it. The offer was $1.8 million for the eastern 30 acres. I would retain the farmhouse and the original 13 acres around it. I looked at it without reacting. I said, "I will need a few days." He said, "Of course." I called Rachel from the parking garage. She told me to ask for $2 million and to propose a percentage stake in the development revenue for the first 5 years. She told me this was absolutely a negotiating situation and not to accept the first number. I went back the following week. We went back and forth twice. We settled at $1.95 million for the 30 acres plus a 3% revenue stake for 4 years. I signed on a Tuesday afternoon in November. I drove home and sat in my car in my own driveway for a while before going inside. My daughter was at a playdate. The house was quiet. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he had said what he thought I was worth, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt like myself. The following weekend was my brother's birthday dinner. He had organized it himself, a reservation at a nice restaurant downtown, the kind of place with cloth napkins and a wine list that requires a flashlight. My aunt was there, my brother's wife, a few of their friends, and my husband, because my brother didn't yet know we had filed. I hadn't corrected him when he included the invitation. I arrived alone, which raised eyebrows. My brother asked where my husband was. I said he had another commitment. My aunt gave me a look I ignored. The dinner was easy the way dinners are easy when no one is saying what they actually want to say. My brother talked about the condo renovations. His wife described the new kitchen they were planning. My aunt asked whether I had done anything with the Tennessee property yet. My brother smiled in a way that was not quite a smile. He said, "Have you figured out what you're going to do with it? You could probably get someone to take it off your hands for something." I said, "I actually already made a decision about it." He said, "Oh yeah? What'd you do? Find someone to lease the fields?" I said I sold part of it. His wife looked up. My aunt tilted her head. My brother said, "How much could you even get for rural Tennessee farmland?" I picked up my water glass. I said, "Just under 2 million. The table went quiet. Not the polite kind of quiet, the kind that happens when the air pressure in a room changes. My brother said, "What?" I explained briefly. The rezoning, the road project, the development. I kept my voice even. I watched his face move through several expressions in a short period of time. Surprise. Confusion. Something that looked a little like the beginning of understanding, but hadn't gotten all the way there yet. His wife said, "Your mother knew about all of this?" I said, "Yes." She had been in contact with the development company for 2 years. My aunt put down her fork. My brother said, "And she didn't tell anyone?" I said, "She told me." In a letter she left with the property documents. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So she just decided you needed it more than the condo." I said, "I think she decided the right person should have the right thing." He didn't say anything to that. My aunt reached across and put her hand on mine briefly. She didn't say anything either. She didn't need to. The rest of dinner was quieter than it had started. Not uncomfortable exactly, just recalibrated. Like furniture that had been rearranged in the night and everyone was still finding their way around it. On the way out, my brother walked beside me to the parking lot. The night air was cold, the kind of cold that makes everything feel sharper and more awake. He said, "I didn't know, Claire." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I would have said something at the will reading if I'd known." I said, "I know that too." He stopped by his car. He looked at me and said, "I'm sorry for not saying anything then, when everyone was making those faces." I said, "It's okay." He said, "It's really not." I let that be true without arguing with it. I drove home under a sky that was starting to cloud over a head of rain. My daughter was already asleep when I got back. I went into her room and stood in the doorway for a moment the way you do when they are small and peaceful and entirely unaware of everything that makes the adult world complicated and heavy. She looked like my mother around the eyes. I stood there for a long time. The divorce was finalized 4 weeks later. My husband did not fight the property settlement because there was nothing to fight. Rachel had been thorough and the law was clear. He got his share of the equity in our house. I got the house itself, since I could afford to buy out his portion now. He got his retirement accounts. I got mine. On the last day of the legal proceedings, he sat across from me in Rachel's conference room and he said, "I had no idea, Claire." I said, "I know." He said, "The land. Your mother." I had no idea any of that was happening. I said, "I know that too." He was quiet. Then he said, "I shouldn't have said what I said." After the will reading, I looked at him. 9 years of mornings and dinners and arguments and silences and small cruelties that he probably did not even remember and that I had probably held onto too tightly. I looked at him, and I didn't feel anger anymore. I had expected to still feel angry. Instead, I felt something much quieter. Something that was mostly just done. I said, "No. You shouldn't have." He nodded. That was the last real conversation we had. My daughter adjusted better than I expected, the way children sometimes do when the tension they have been living inside finally lifts and the air in the house becomes breathable again. She asked me once, a few months after, if I was sad. I told her I was the opposite of sad. She thought about that. She said, "What is the opposite of sad?" I said, "I'm not totally sure, but I think it might be this." She seemed satisfied with that answer. I kept the farmhouse and the 13 acres. I drive out there on long weekends sometimes, just the two of us. We have fixed the porch boards. We painted the front door red. There are 4 Adirondack chairs on the porch now, and we sit in them and watch the tree line at the far edge of the property and listen to the kind of quiet that you cannot find anywhere inside a city. The construction on the eastern 30 acres started in March. I can hear it sometimes when the wind is right. Metal and machinery, and the sound of something being built. Summit Ridge sends quarterly statements. The revenue share started small and is growing in the direction everyone projected it would. My mother was right about the timeline. She was right about a lot of things. There is one more thing I have not mentioned, and I want to say it because it is the truest part. The night after I found the letter in the barn, before I drove home, I sat on the farmhouse porch in the cold for a long time. The stars out there are different from the city. There are more of them. They have more room. I sat there, and I thought about my mother writing that letter. Sitting at this same porch, maybe, or at the kitchen table inside, writing to a daughter she already knew she was going to leave before she was ready. Choosing her words carefully. Trying to say in writing what she had not been able to say out loud all the times we had sat in the same room and let the words stay inside. You have always been the one who looked deeper, who waited, who understood that the surface of something is almost never the whole story. She saw me, even when I stopped seeing myself. Even when I had spent so many years making myself smaller to fit someone else's idea of what I should be that I had almost forgotten I had ever been a different shape. She saw me, and she left me something she believed I could carry. I did not let her down. When I drive past the construction site now, I see the steel frames going up and the equipment moving across the land and the road beginning to take its shape through the eastern fields. The old barn is still standing on my 13 acres, well outside the development boundary. I have been slowly cleaning it out, fixing the slats, letting the light in properly. My daughter asked me last week what we should do with it. I told her I wasn't sure yet, that sometimes it's okay to know something is valuable before you know exactly what it's for. That the most important thing is to take care of it while you figure that out. She said, "Like us?" I said, "Yes. Exactly like us." She thought about that for a second. Then she climbed up on the workbench where the old tools are still laid out, and she looked at me from up there with my mother's eyes, and she said, "I think it should be something good." I said, "Me too." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed that was exactly what it was going to be.